The girl had always preferred to sit in the last row of the classroom, close to the window where the sunlight fell softly on her desk. She didn't talk much, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she never liked the idea of all eyes turning toward her. She felt safe in quiet spaces, places where nobody expected anything from her, places where she could simply exist without being pushed forward. Most days, she blended in so well that even her classmates sometimes forgot she was there. It wasn't that she didn't care about school. She did. She listened carefully, wrote neat notes, and always turned in her homework on time. But she rarely raised her hand, rarely looked anyone directly in the eye, and rarely tried to draw attention. She lived in her own calm world, and she liked it that way. In the music class, though, things were a little different. The room felt louder than any other place in the school. Students joked around, tapped on desks, and made noise even before the teacher arrived. The teacher herself was strict, serious, and carried a tone that made everyone sit straight the moment she stepped in. She wasn't a bad person, but she often believed that students needed to be pushed, sometimes harder than necessary, to bring out the best in them. And sometimes she misread silence as laziness. That day, she entered the room with her usual impatient expression, her music folder tucked under her arm. She looked around quickly, scanning for anything out of order, and then her gaze stopped at the girl by the window. The girl was sitting quietly, her hands folded on her desk, looking down at the music sheet in front of her. The teacher narrowed her eyes slightly. In her mind, quiet students could be two things, either incredibly focused or completely uninterested. And because the girl didn't speak up, didn't ask questions, and didn't volunteer for class activities, the teacher assumed she fell in the second group. She called roll, tapping her pen on the desk between each name. When she reached the girl's name, the girl raised her hand silently, her voice barely above a whisper. The teacher paused, as if annoyed by how soft she sounded, then continued. Once the roll call was done, the teacher decided she wanted to test the class. She believed too many students were becoming comfortable, and she wanted to remind them that participation was not optional. So she asked who had practiced the piece she had assigned the week before. A few students raised their hands. Most did not. The girl kept her hands on her desk, head low. The teacher took a slow breath, clearly disappointed. "I asked you all to practice," she said firmly. "This isn't a free period. You need discipline if you want to learn." A few students exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what was coming. The teacher had a habit of choosing someone random to demonstrate something in front of everyone when she felt the class wasn't taking things seriously. And usually, that person had to face her disappointment if they didn't perform well. Her eyes swept across the room again, and the girl felt a small knot form in her stomach. She didn't know why she suddenly felt the teacher's focus on her, but she kept her gaze on her desk. Maybe if she stayed still enough, she would be overlooked. She had managed to stay invisible for so long, but not today. "You," the teacher said finally, pointing toward the back row. The girl looked up slowly. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her expression said enough. "Please, not me. Come to the front," the teacher said, motioning with her hand. "Play the piece we learned last week." The classroom fell into a strange mix of surprise and curiosity. A few students whispered under their breath, wondering why she was chosen. Some thought it might be interesting to see her do something other than stare at her notebook. Others assumed she would stumble through the keys and give them something to laugh about later. The girl herself felt her heartbeat rise in her chest. She opened her mouth slightly, as if to say she couldn't do it. But the words didn't come out. She didn't like arguing. She didn't like the idea of disappointing adults. Even though she wanted to tell the teacher that she really didn't want to play, she just couldn't get the words out. "Come on," the teacher repeated, sounding more impatient now. You didn't practice either, did you? The girl shook her head very subtly, but the teacher didn't wait for a reply. Then this is even more important. You'll play it now. We learn by doing. The girl stood slowly, her chair making a soft scraping sound that echoed more loudly than it should have. She felt every pair of eyes on her. Her steps toward the front of the room felt heavier than normal, as if the floor itself was pulling her down. She reached the piano, a large black instrument that sat near the whiteboard. She had seen other students play it countless times, had watched them struggle, laugh, or succeed. But she had never played it in front of anyone here. Not once. The teacher crossed her arms, her expression stern. Go ahead, she said. Let's hear it. The girl placed her hands on the keys. They trembled slightly. She took a slow breath, trying to calm herself. She didn't want to embarrass herself. She didn't want to be remembered for something bad. But the pressure in the room felt almost like a weight on her shoulders. Behind her, she could sense the students watching. A few leaned forward, eager for the scene to unfold. Some pulled out their phones, trying to be discreet, but not discreet enough. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, wishing she could disappear. She didn't want to reveal anything. She especially didn't want to reveal the one thing she had been hiding for years, the thing that made her heart feel alive whenever she was alone. The piano had always been her secret place, her safe space, her comfort on the rough days. She had learned to play long before she learned to speak confidently, long before she understood anything else about the world. She played at home, late in the evenings, when the house felt calm and nobody asked questions. Music was her voice, but she never shared it, and now she was being forced to do exactly that. The teacher tapped her foot slightly, waiting. Any day now, she said. The girl took one more deep breath. She touched the keys gently, her fingers resting lightly on them. She didn't begin right away. She needed a moment, and in that moment, the entire room seemed to grow quieter. Even the whispers stopped. She lifted her hands again, then lowered them. She wasn't ready. She needed to control her breathing. She needed to gather herself. She needed to decide whether she would play the assigned piece or something else. The teacher sighed loudly. If you didn't practice, she said, just do your best. But you must try. The girl nodded slowly. She didn't want to argue. She didn't want trouble. But she also didn't want to play something she barely cared about. She pressed one key softly, letting the sound float for a moment. That tiny note felt like a spark inside her. She looked at the piano again, her breathing calmer now. Her hands settled into a familiar position, not for the classroom assignment, not for the simple tune everyone else had learned, but for something deeper, something she had played hundreds of times when she was alone. Her fingers hovered. She hesitated. Behind her, a boy whispered, "This is going to be bad." Another chuckled quietly. The teacher didn't hear them, but the girl did. Their words didn't anger her. They didn't even surprise her. But they did something unexpected. They helped her make a decision. She pressed the first key again, this time with intention. Then another, and another. A soft melody began to form, delicate but clear. It wasn't the assigned piece. It wasn't something from the lesson book. It was something she kept close to her heart, something she only played when nobody was listening. The first few notes drifted quietly through the room. A couple of students leaned back, confused. The teacher frowned slightly, unsure of what she was hearing. But the girl didn't stop. Once her fingers found their rhythm, she no longer cared about the room, or the stairs, or the pressure. She played because she had to. Because once her hands started, they carried a life of their own. The classroom fell silent, not because they were impressed yet, but because they didn't know what to make of it. The girl played with a softness that didn't match her quiet personality. It was gentle but powerful in its own way. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steadied, and for the first time since entering the room, she felt like herself. Her hands flowed across the keys with ease, the melody growing more emotional, more expressive, more alive. Students who had expected her to fail suddenly forgot to whisper. Someone lowered their phone, realizing this wasn't something to record thoughtlessly. Even the teacher, who had been ready to criticize, lowered her arms slowly. But the girl didn't notice any of that. She was somewhere else. Somewhere quiet and beautiful. Somewhere where the world didn't judge her. And as she continued to play, the room shifted. Something gentle, almost magical, began to fill the space. By the time she approached the last part of the piece, the classroom had completely transformed. Every student sat still. The teacher stood frozen. For a moment, the girl was not the shy student in the last row. She was something much more. She finished with a soft final note that lingered in the air, settling like a warm breath over the room. Then she let her hands fall onto her lap. She didn't look up yet. She didn't want to see their faces, but she would soon, and none of them would ever look at her the same way again. The last note of her melody still hung in the air as she slowly lifted her fingers from the piano. The room stayed perfectly silent, almost too silent. She could hear the soft hum of the classroom lights, the quiet rustle of someone shifting in their seat, even the distant noise of students from another hallway. But no one from her class made a sound. It was as if everyone had forgotten how to breathe. She kept her eyes on the keys, afraid to look up. She had never played in front of a room full of people like this. She wasn't even sure what came over her or why she chose that piece. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe she was tired of pretending she didn't know how to play. Whatever the reason, she had just revealed a part of herself she never planned to share. She could feel her heartbeat slowing down. The fear she had felt earlier was no longer in her chest. Instead, a strange calm settled over her. She knew she had done something unexpected, maybe even shocking. But she also knew she had played well, not perfect, but from the heart. And that was enough. She slowly lifted her head. The first thing she saw was the teacher, standing a few steps away. The teacher's arms were no longer crossed. Instead, her hands hung by her sides, and her face was frozen in a stunned expression. Her eyebrows were raised slightly, and her mouth was parted as if she had been about to say something, but then forgot the words entirely. The girl had never seen her teacher look like that before. This was a woman who always appeared in complete control, always sure of herself, always ready to correct or scold. But now her eyes looked wide and thoughtful, almost confused. Then the girl turned slightly and glanced at her classmates. Some of them looked like they had just witnessed something unbelievable. A few blinked repeatedly, as if trying to understand what had just happened. One girl near the front had her hand over her mouth. Another student leaned forward, elbows on his desk, staring without blinking. Even the boy who had whispered earlier, the one who expected her to embarrass herself, had his eyes wide open, looking stunned. Nobody moved, nobody laughed, nobody teased. It felt unreal. The silence stretched on, until finally the teacher cleared her throat softly, almost like she was trying to re-enter reality. She opened her mouth, searching for words. Then she closed it again. For a moment, her confident nature seemed to disappear. She looked almost embarrassed. The girl waited, unsure of what was coming. Finally, the teacher said quietly, "Where did you learn to play like that?" Her voice was softer than usual, without the sharp edge she normally carried. The girl looked down again for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. She didn't want to sound proud or dramatic, so she simply said, "At home." The teacher blinked. "At home? Without lessons?" The girl nodded. A few gasps echoed across the classroom. tiny but noticeable. Someone whispered, "No way." But it didn't sound like a mocking voice. It sounded more like admiration or disbelief. The teacher took a breath, pressing one hand lightly against her own chest. That was very advanced," she said. "That wasn't beginner music. Not even close." The girl didn't respond. She didn't know what she was supposed to say. She wanted to go back to her seat. She wanted to disappear again. She wanted things to feel normal. But nothing about the moment felt normal. The teacher stepped closer to the piano, staring at the keys as if they had betrayed her. Then she looked at the girl again. "Why didn't you say you could play?" she asked, her tone surprisingly gentle. The girl shrugged a little. "I didn't think it mattered." That answer made the teacher's expression soften even more. Something like regret flickered across her face, regret for having pushed her so forcefully into the spotlight. The teacher looked around at the rest of the class. "Well," she said, trying to regain some control, "that was unexpected." The students didn't laugh. They didn't snicker. For once, every single one of them seemed to understand the seriousness of the moment. The teacher ran her hand through her hair slowly. "All right," she continued, her voice steadier now but still warm. "Return to your seat." The girl nodded and stood up. As she walked back to the last row, she kept her head low. Her steps felt lighter this time, though. Something inside her had shifted. Even though she was nervous about the attention, she felt a small spark of pride growing quietly inside her as she passed through the rows of desks. Students watched her, not with judgment, but with curiosity and something close to respect. A few even leaned away to give her space, as if she were suddenly someone important. When she sat down, her hands were still slightly warm from playing. She placed them on her lap and let out a quiet breath. She didn't know she'd been holding Dot. The teacher walked to the front of the room again. She looked like she was trying to recover her usual serious posture, but something about her had clearly changed. "Everyone open your books," she said. "We'll continue the lesson." But even she knew nobody's mind was on the book. The girl looked at her notebook, pretending to follow along, but her thoughts were tangled. She replayed the moment in her head, the fear, the pressure, the melody, the silence afterward. She wondered what everyone must be thinking now. She wondered if people would treat her differently. She wondered if this moment would follow her for the rest of the school year. Then she heard the softest whisper beside her. It came from the girl who sat one seat over. She rarely spoke to anyone either, but she leaned slightly toward her and said, "That was beautiful." The girl blinked in surprise. She didn't expect anyone to talk to her. She didn't even know this classmate paid attention to her in the first place. She whispered back, "Thank you," so quietly she almost didn't hear her own voice. When the class ended, the bell rang louder than usual. Students gathered their things, but they didn't rush out like they normally did. Instead, several of them lingered, their eyes drifting toward the girl in the last row. 2 students approached her desk, unsure whether to speak. One of them said, "Hey, that was amazing, seriously." The other nodded and added, "I didn't know you could play like that." The girl felt heat rise in her cheeks. She avoided their eyes at first, but then she looked up and managed a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly. More students came by as they packed up, giving her quiet compliments, small nods, or looks of admiration. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. Nobody teased her. Nobody made fun of her. They genuinely seemed impressed. The teacher watched from her desk, her expression unreadable, but her eyes followed the girl as she walked toward the door. Just before the girl left the classroom, the teacher called out, "Wait." The girl paused and turned slowly. The teacher approached her, not in a strict way, but in a careful, almost respectful way. "I want you to know something," she said quietly so the others wouldn't hear. I misjudged you today? The girl looked up, surprised. You're talented, the teacher continued. Very talented. I didn't expect that. And I shouldn't have forced you to play like that. The girl didn't know what to say. She only nodded slightly. If you're comfortable, the teacher said, I would like you to play for the class again someday. But only if you want to. I won't push you like that again. The girl hesitated. She didn't know if she wanted to perform again. But she appreciated the teacher's effort, the softness in her voice, the hint of apology. She finally said, maybe. The teacher gave her a small smile, something she rarely showed anyone. All right, she said. You may go. The girl stepped out into the hallway. It felt strange walking through the crowd of students who had no idea what had just happened inside the music room. She walked past them quietly, carrying a secret that no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a new beginning. As she made her way to her next class, she kept touching her fingers gently, as if the piano keys were still beneath them. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, or the next week. But she knew one thing for sure. Something had changed. The quiet girl who sat in the back row was no longer invisible. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure she wanted to be. The next day felt different the moment she stepped onto the school grounds. Usually she blended into the noise and movement of the morning crowd, slipping quietly through the hallways without anyone noticing her. But today was not like that. Today she felt eyes on her before she even reached the building. At first, she thought she might be imagining it. Maybe she was just nervous because she barely slept the night before. Her mind kept replaying what happened in music class, the silence, the looks, the teacher's reaction. But when she reached the entrance, 2 students from her grade glanced at her and whispered something to each other. When she looked their way, they quickly smiled and looked down. That never happened to her before. She tightened her grip on her bag and walked faster, trying to blend in like she always did. But it was impossible to ignore the way people were trying not to stare. Not in a rude way. More like they were curious. Even in the hallway, things felt unusual. One boy who never talked to her before nodded politely as he passed her. A girl from her science class gave her a small smile, like she knew something no one else did. It made her heart beat faster. She didn't want attention, not like this. She wanted the peace she had before. But at the same time, she couldn't pretend that being noticed felt completely bad. There was something warm about it. Something new. When she reached the classroom for her first period, she took her usual seat near the back. A couple of classmates turned when she walked in, as if waiting for her. One of them whispered, "That's her," but not in a mean or mocking tone. More like someone talking about something impressive. She wished the ground would open and swallow her. Yet she also felt a strange little fire inside, like she was proud, even if she didn't want to show it. When the teacher began the lesson, she tried her best to focus, but she kept thinking about the music room. She wondered what the teacher must be thinking now. Would the teacher treat her differently? Would she call on her more often, or less? Would she expect things from her now? Most of all, she wondered what would happen when she walked into music class again later that day. Would everyone stare? Would they ask her to play again? Would the teacher pretend nothing happened? She wasn't ready for any of it. When the bell rang, she moved quickly into the hallway, hoping to slip away before anyone spoke to her. But as she walked, a group of students slowed down beside her. "Hey," one of them said gently. "We heard about yesterday. You played really well." She felt her face grow warm. "Thanks," she said quietly. Another student added, "Do you play other songs like that?" It sounded kind of professional. She shrugged a little. "I just practice a lot." They seemed impressed by that, like she had said something unusual. After a moment, they drifted away, But she could still feel the memory of their attention lingering behind her. By the time she reached music class, her stomach was tight with nerves. She paused outside the door and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She didn't want to walk into a room full of eyes staring at her. She didn't want people whispering. But she couldn't avoid the class forever. So she went inside. The moment she walked through the door, every conversation in the room dipped slightly, just enough for her to notice. A few students turned their heads. Someone nudged their friend. Someone else straightened in their seat. She wished her body would melt into the floor. She walked to her usual seat in the back. The room was slightly quieter than normal, but she tried to pretend she didn't notice. She kept her gaze on her notebook and waited for the teacher to arrive. When the teacher walked in, the room settled immediately. The teacher didn't look annoyed or impatient like she often did. Instead, she looked thoughtful. Her eyes swept the room and then paused briefly on the girl. Just a moment. But it was enough to make the girl's chest tighten. Class began normally. The teacher talked about rhythm, tempo, and musical expression. But the girl could tell something was different. The teacher spoke with less strictness, as if she was trying to soften her tone. Eventually, the teacher took a deep breath and said, "Before we move on, I want to mention something." The entire room straightened. "I want to address what happened yesterday," she continued. The girl's heart dropped. The teacher didn't look at her directly, but everyone else did. "Sometimes," the teacher said carefully, "we expect too little or too much from someone based on how they appear. And sometimes we judge without meaning to." She paused and looked toward the piano. "Yesterday reminded me that we all carry something inside of us, something others don't always see." A few students nodded. The girl kept her eyes on her desk. The teacher continued, "I want this class to be a place where talent can grow, without pressure or fear." Her voice softened even more. "That applies to everyone." The room fell silent. Then she continued the lesson. The girl felt her shoulders relax a little. She was grateful the teacher didn't call her out by name. She still felt every pair of eyes on her, but at least she wasn't being forced into anything again. After class, as she tried to leave quickly, the teacher gently touched her arm. "A moment, please." She froze. The room emptied until it was just the two of them. The teacher looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before, one of genuine respect mixed with regret. "Hope I didn't make you uncomfortable today," the teacher said softly. The girl shook her head. Even though she had been uncomfortable, she didn't like making adults feel bad. The teacher continued, "You're playing. It was remarkable. Not just good, remarkable. I didn't expect that." The girl looked down. "I just practiced. That's all." "No," the teacher said, shaking her head. "It was more than practice. You play with feeling. That's rare." The girl's face warmed. She didn't know how to respond. "Listen," the teacher said kindly. "You don't have to play in front of the class again if you don't want to. I won't ask you unless you volunteer. I want you to feel safe here." The girl nodded slowly. She appreciated that more than she could say. Before she left, the teacher added, "But if you ever want to explore your talent more, I'll help you. You don't have to hide it." Those words lingered in her ears long after she walked out of the room. The rest of the day passed with the same strange mixture of attention and quiet admiration. At lunch, she sat alone at her usual table, but she didn't feel alone. People kept glancing her way, and some even waved or smiled. She felt uncomfortable with all the attention, yet a small part of her felt proud, almost happy. It was confusing. As she ate, she thought about the teacher's words. You don't have to hide it. But hiding had always been easier. Hiding felt safe. Showing her talent felt risky, like opening a door she wasn't sure she could close again. After school, she walked home slowly. The sky was warm and golden, and the breeze brushed against her cheeks. She watched leaves dance in the wind and tried to understand how one moment, one unexpected performance, had changed everything. When she reached her house, she placed her bag down and went straight to the small piano tucked in the corner of the living room. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't new. But it was hers. The one place she felt most like herself. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. Not the song she played in class, but something softer, something that helped her think dot as the melody flowed. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine the future. Would she keep her talent hidden? Or would she share it again someday? Would the teacher ask her to play at a school event? Would students expect more from her now? She didn't know, but she did know something important. For the first time in her life, people saw her not as the quiet girl hiding in the back row, but as someone with a gift. And whether she liked the attention or not, she couldn't pretend it hadn't changed something inside her. As she finished the last note, she whispered to herself, "I'm not the same anymore." And deep down, she knew it was true. The day of the school's small music event arrived, and the girl could feel her stomach twisting in ways she had never felt before. It was a warm afternoon, sunlight streaming through the windows of the music hall, making everything look brighter, almost golden. She had spent hours at home practicing, even though she had not been asked to perform. She wanted to feel ready, to control the nervousness, to make this moment hers. But no matter how many times she practiced, a small voice inside her kept whispering that she wasn't ready. When she entered the hall, she noticed the seats were already half filled with students, teachers, and a few parents who had come early. The room buzzed softly with whispers and footsteps, yet the girl felt isolated, as if she were standing on a small island in the middle of a flowing river. She clutched her sheet music lightly in her hands, though she knew she wouldn't need it. Her fingers remembered everything on their own. Still, holding the papers made her feel like she had some control over the situation. The teacher who had singled her out in class yesterday stood near the piano, adjusting a small microphone and checking the benches. When she saw the girl, she walked over with a warm smile. It was the same teacher, yet she looked softer, kinder. The sharpness in her eyes from before was replaced with encouragement. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. The girl nodded, though her throat felt tight. She didn't want to admit how nervous she was. The teacher gave her a reassuring nod and stepped back, allowing her space. "Whenever you're ready," she said. "Take your time." The girl walked to the piano slowly. Her legs felt heavy, but her mind felt clear. She sat down and let her fingers hover over the keys. The hall had gone quiet in an instant, the murmurs of the audience dying down as soon as she sat. She could hear the soft rustle of programs being held in laps and the distant ticking of the clock. But she tuned all of that out. She only focused on the piano, on the familiar weight of the keys beneath her fingers. She took a deep breath. The first note sounded soft, delicate, almost like a whisper. She closed her eyes and let the melody take over, letting her feelings flow through her fingers. Each note carried a story: her fears, her quiet moments at the back of the classroom, her secret practices at home, the mornings when no one had noticed her, the afternoons when she had hidden in the music room to escape the world. All of it poured out in the music, that the audience sat in stunned silence. Even the teacher who had doubted her stared with her mouth slightly open, unable to hide the awe in her eyes. Students who had once ignored her or assumed she was timid now leaned forward, trying not to miss a single note. A few parents glanced at each other, surprised by the depth of emotion in such a young player. Her fingers moved with confidence, yet delicacy. The melody swelled and softened, rising and falling like waves on a calm sea. She felt herself breathe with the music, letting it carry her fears and transform them into something beautiful. For a moment, she forgot about the audience. She forgot about being judged. She forgot about expectations. There was only the piano, only the sound, only the music that had lived inside her for so long. When she reached the middle of the piece, the notes became stronger, faster, more passionate. Her hands moved almost on their own, and yet she felt completely in control. It was as if the music had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to share it with the world. She played with every ounce of herself, and the audience could feel it. They didn't just hear the notes, they felt the story behind them, the struggles, the quiet resilience. The beauty of someone who had been underestimated for so long. By the time she reached the final section, tears had begun to prick her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of release, of letting go, of showing who she truly was. She struck the last chord with a strength that seemed to resonate through the hall. The note lingered, fading slowly, leaving a quiet echo that seemed to hang in the air longer than it should. She lowered her hands and sat still, unable to move, unable to breathe at first. She felt exhausted, relieved, and alive all at the same time. The room stayed silent for a moment, as if everyone was trying to process what had just happened. Then a single clap rang out, soft but clear. Another followed. Then more, until the entire hall erupted in applause. Students, teachers, and parents were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. The girl sat frozen, overwhelmed by the noise, by the attention, by the realization that she had just shared something deeply personal, and that people had truly understood it. The teacher rushed to her side. "That was incredible," she said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Absolutely incredible." The girl felt her cheeks burn. She had never expected such a reaction. She wasn't used to praise, especially not from a room full of people who had once ignored her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the applause. One of her classmates, the boy who had teased her before, came forward with wide eyes. I didn't know you could do that," he said. "It was amazing." Another student, the one who had whispered words of encouragement in class, smiled at her. "You have to play more." "Please," she said. The girl wanted to say yes, wanted to promise she would. But she simply nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. The teacher gently guided her to the center of the stage for a bow. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and stepped forward. The applause grew louder, echoing in her ears. Her body shook slightly with nerves, but she held her head high. For the first time, she felt seen. For the first time, she felt proud. And for the first time, she believed in herself in a way she never had before. When the applause finally died down, the teacher spoke again. "You have a gift. Don't ever hide it. You're going to inspire people with your music, and I'm so proud of you." The girl's hands trembled slightly, but she felt a quiet strength growing inside her. She realized something important. Talent wasn't something to hide out of fear or shyness. Talent was meant to be shared, and sharing it could change not just her life, but the lives of everyone who heard it. As the audience began to leave, the girl noticed people approaching her. Some with smiles, some with quiet words of admiration. A few students even asked if she would teach them some of the techniques she used. She nodded politely, unsure of how to respond fully, but feeling warmth spread through her chest. Later, when she walked home, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. She felt light, as if something heavy had been lifted from her shoulders. She replayed the performance in her mind, remembering the way her fingers had moved, the way the hall had felt, the way people had looked at her. She realized she had crossed a threshold. She had stepped out of the shadows and into a place where her voice could be heard without fear, Her parents were waiting when she reached home. They had heard from the school about the performance, and their faces glowed with pride. They hugged her tightly, and she felt tears form at the corners of her eyes. She had always loved music, always found comfort in it, but she had never imagined it could bring so much joy and recognition. She felt seen, appreciated, and loved not just for who she was, but for what she could create. That night, she returned to her piano. She didn't play for anyone else. She played for herself, for the feeling of freedom and expression that music gave her. She let her fingers wander over the keys, improvising melodies, exploring emotions she hadn't yet expressed. And as she played, she realized that her life had changed. The quiet girl who had once avoided attention now carried a spark that couldn't be ignored. She had discovered the power of her own voice, and she knew she would never let it be hidden again. The music flowed into the night, soft and gentle, yet full of strength. It filled the room with a sense of hope and possibility. She closed her eyes, letting the sound carry her, letting the joy and relief wash over her. For the first time, she felt completely free, completely herself, and completely ready for whatever the future might bring. And deep inside, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning. The days after the music event felt strange but wonderful for the girl. She walked through school with a new awareness around her. People no longer ignored her. Some still whispered, but now their words carried curiosity and admiration rather than mockery. Students she barely knew smiled when she passed, and a few even asked her questions about music. For the first time, she felt like she belonged in the world around her, not just as a quiet observer, but as someone who had something meaningful to offer. At first, it was difficult to adjust. She had always been invisible by choice, and suddenly she was not. Sometimes she wanted to retreat back into the quiet corners of the school, away from the curious eyes and the polite admiration. But each time she tried, something inside her whispered that this was different. This was her moment, her chance to be herself in a way she had never dared before. Her teacher watched the changes closely. She noticed how students began to approach the girl, seeking advice, encouragement, or even just a smile. The teacher realized that what she had done when she pushed the girl to the piano had opened a door that could never be closed. She herself had changed too. She had learned that talent could not be forced, but it could be nurtured. And sometimes the quietest students held the deepest strengths. One afternoon, the teacher approached the girl after class. "The principal and I were talking," she said softly. "We think it would be wonderful if you played at the school's upcoming assembly. It's a chance for more students to hear your music." The girl's heart skipped a beat. The thought of performing in front of the entire school was terrifying. She could imagine the hall full of people, all eyes on her, all waiting. But she also remembered the way it had felt during the last performance, the calm that had come when she let herself play, the joy of sharing her music. She nodded slowly. "I'll try," she whispered. The teacher smiled, proud but careful not to push too hard. "I know you will do great. Just play from your heart, like last time." Over the next few days, the girl practiced diligently. She stayed after school, alone in the music room, letting the piano keys guide her through new melodies. Sometimes she felt frustrated, feeling as if she could never play perfectly. But then she reminded herself that it wasn't about perfection. It was about expression, about letting the music carry her feelings and her story. The day of the assembly arrived. The school auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and parents. The girl waited backstage, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of the piano bench. She could hear the murmurs of the audience, the faint creak of chairs, the soft rustle of programs. Her heart raced, and for a moment she wished she could disappear. But then she thought of her teacher's words. of the way people had looked at her after the music room performance, of the small spark she had felt inside herself. She realized she was ready not because she wasn't nervous, but because she was no longer afraid to be seen. The teacher gave her a reassuring nod. "It's your moment," she said quietly. "Go when you're ready." The girl walked to the piano and sat down. She let her fingers hover over the keys for a moment, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. Then she began to play. The notes started softly, gently filling the auditorium. The melody carried warmth and emotion, telling a story without words. The audience listened in silence, captivated by the beauty of her music. She played with the same passion and honesty that she had in the music room. But now the hall was larger, the stakes higher, and the feeling of connection even stronger. As she continued, she noticed some students leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed. Parents watched quietly, some with tears in their eyes. Teachers exchanged glances, impressed and moved. And the principal, standing at the back, nodded in quiet approval. The girl's hands moved with confidence. Each note seemed to glide effortlessly from her fingers, though she knew it was the result of countless hours of practice, determination, and quiet courage. She felt herself letting go of fear, letting the music speak for her in a way words never could. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath, listening to her story unfold through the piano. When she reached the final section, the melody became fuller, more powerful. Her fingers danced across the keys, expressing joy, longing, hope, and strength all at once. The sound filled every corner of the hall, leaving no doubt that she had grown, not only as a musician, but as a person. And then it was over. She struck the last chord with careful precision. The note lingered, hanging in the air like a soft sigh. She slowly lifted her hands and sat motionless, letting the silence speak. For a moment, the audience did not move. Then the applause erupted, stronger than she had ever imagined. Students clapped and cheered, some standing, some wiping tears from their eyes. Parents gave warm smiles and words of praise. Teachers nodded and whispered compliments. The girl felt her face grow hot, a mixture of embarrassment and pride washing over her. She had shared herself completely, and it had been received with admiration and understanding. The teacher came forward and hugged her gently. "I am so proud of you," she said. "You were incredible." The girl's heart swelled. She realized that all the moments of doubt, of hiding, of fear, had led her to this. She had discovered not just her talent, but her courage. She had learned that showing who you are, even when it feels scary, can create moments of connection and understanding. After the assembly, students came to her, some asking if she would teach them, others simply congratulating her. A few parents approached, praising her and encouraging her to continue pursuing music. Even the principal shook her hand warmly, telling her that her performance had inspired everyone in the school. That evening, she returned home and sat at her piano. This time, she didn't play for anyone but herself. She let her fingers wander over the keys, improvising, exploring new melodies, discovering new emotions. She played for the joy of it, for the comfort of it, for the freedom of it. And as she played, she realized that she had changed completely. She was no longer the quiet girl in the back row. She had stepped into a place where her voice could be heard, her talent could shine, and her heart could express itself without fear. Over the following weeks, her confidence grew. She volunteered to play for smaller school events, sometimes for friends' birthdays or class presentations. Each time she played, she felt the same mix of nerves and excitement, the same quiet strength that had carried her through her first performance. And each time, she discovered something new about herself, her ability to connect with others, her resilience, her determination, and her joy in sharing what she loved. Her teacher continued to encourage her, offering advice and guidance, but never pressuring her. Other students who had once ignored her began to approach her for lessons, advice, and friendship. The girl realized that the music had not only changed how people saw her, but how she saw herself. She no longer felt invisible. She no longer doubted her abilities. She had discovered her own power, and it was thrilling. One afternoon, while practicing alone at school, the teacher approached her again. "You know," she said, smiling softly, "I have learned more from you than I ever imagined. You taught me patience, understanding, and the importance of letting people shine in their own time." The girl looked up, surprised. "Me?" she asked quietly. "Yes," the teacher said. "You showed me that sometimes the quietest students have the loudest voices, and that talent can't always be measured by what we expect. Thank you for sharing your gift." The girl felt tears form in her eyes. She had never thought of herself as someone who could teach others or inspire them. But here she was, not only playing music, but shaping the way others thought and felt. It was overwhelming, but also wonderful. As the sun set that evening, she sat by her piano at home, letting the music flow. She realized that the journey she had been on was just beginning. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and times when fear would try to creep back in. But she now knew that she could face them. She knew she had the courage, the talent, and the heart to overcome them. She closed her eyes and let the final notes of her song linger in the air. In that moment, she felt complete. She had been forced into the spotlight once, and it had terrified her. But now, she had chosen to shine. She had learned to trust herself, to share her gift, and to embrace the power of her own voice. And as the quiet girl who had once sat at the back of the classroom looked toward the future, she smiled softly. She knew she had discovered something far greater than applause or recognition. She had discovered herself, and that was a gift no one could ever take away.